What's up, guys? My name is Ecom Moose, and in today's video, I want to go over what I believe is the true definition of what strategy actually means. I feel like this is something that no one actually talks about. The only person I've heard that has given a good breakdown of this is Alex Hormozy. So I want to play into a little bit of what he says, but really how it applies for me and what I've been able to do. And I think hopefully you guys will be able to get some value out of this. Just some context on myself. So I run a portfolio of e-commerce brands. We're now doing 8 figures a month in sales. Portfolio has been growing a lot. The brands have been growing. So things are really starting to get to the next level. And I think strategy for me is something that is more important than ever. So I really want to give my perspective on it so that hopefully going into 2026, you guys can take some of these frameworks so you can apply this to your own strategies. Now, of course, everyone's business model, everyone's business needs are going to be different, but hopefully this will give you guys a good thinking process to understand how you can look at strategy on your own. So the simple way I look at strategy, if we go right into it, is I like to use this diagram because this is something that really visually encompasses what I have in mind with it, where strategy is, if we look at this rectangle, right, all of the stuff in red are the things that we could be doing. Now, these can go all the way. I'll use e-commerce businesses as an example, where we could be talking about doing more creatives, figuring out how to expand the creatives team, building out a funnel team. This could be trying to crack a new channel. This could be optimizing your supply chain. And that's all in the context of one brand. But a lot of people will start to think, what if I launch another product, another brand, all these different things? And I'll give a backstory for myself, right? Where I've come full circle on this, where when I first really started to pick up in e-commerce, right? I've told this story before, but pretty much what happened with us is that we developed a strategy that was a multi-channel approach, and we were able to scale things super quickly. So we were able to scale up to 6 million a month within 3-4 months of launching a few products. We had a formula. So what we kept on doing is just launching more and more products all the way till we were diversified across 7 different products. And what started to happen was the main products that actually were getting us momentum started to decline in revenue. And then as a whole, the 6 million a month actually declined to around 4 million a month and was going down, right? What I learned from that whole experience is that, and if we look at this context over here, is that if we look at this analogy, these are all the things that we could be doing versus capacity that we have to do. And let's define each of these real quick, right? So capacity, it's not only you as a founder in your personal capacity, but it's capacity of also your team, your resources, your capital, all of those things that come into capacity. It's, do you have all the things to do all the things that we wanted to do, right? So within this window, when we were running 2 products and scaling that to 6 million a month, we had enough capacity to be doing it. We had enough team resources to actually make consistent good creatives, manage all of the ad accounts, do all the things that needed to get done within this window, right? But what we started to do is we started to do that same thing over all of the things that were required for those 2 products, but we started to do it on 3 times more, right? We were at 6, 7 products, right? And reality is our team didn't grow fast enough to give us the capacity to actually be able to sustain it. So what ended up happening was the limited capacity that we had got spread too thin, and we weren't able to focus on those new products, which actually caused the things that were actually doing well in the first place to decline. And that goes into this, where this can be a lot of different things, right? This could be new brands. This could be new industries that you want to go into. This could be doing crypto on the side. This could be a lot of different things that come into how much capacity you have. But what reality is, all of us only have a certain amount of capacity. And technically, this red box can be endless amounts of things, right? This can be way more things because technically the world is your oyster, right? You could go and do anything. You could do affiliate marketing, you could do drop shipping, you could do course selling, you could do endless amounts of things. But reality is, given your 24 hours in the day and your team's 24 hours in the day and the limited amount of resources, capital, and infrastructure you have, you could really only sustain to do a certain amount unless you grow this, which we'll talk about in a second of how you can actually scale capacity. But I think the first thing that's really important to understand is this spectrum, and I think this visual really helps bring it to life. I guess before we even go into how to determine what your strategy should be, I think it's more so determining what you shouldn't do, right? If we look at this point over here, so what the big mistake that a lot of people try to do is they try to fit way more than they actually have given the resources that they have. So when they're planning their strategy, just call it, we got 2026 coming up. So people will put all these things on their list, but reality is they only have this amount of capacity, and they'll put all the things that will go into this red zone where they don't actually have the capacity to complete it. And that's the biggest reason why people don't actually achieve their goals, is because what they try to do is way more than they actually can sustain within the given time frame. So capacity can grow through different levers, which again, I'm going to circle back into, but given the capacity, especially if we look at this within a year window, the biggest mistake is doing more than what you can actually sustain. To define what I look at as good strategy is this line right here. Strategy is selecting from all the could do to fill into that limited capacity. So the definition that I look at it, and this is very similar to what Alex Hormozi says, is that between all these things that we could do, right? So all of these red is the things that we could do, which again are endless, but if you're a good experienced business owner, then you'll probably narrow this down into, what feels like it's enough, but it actually is, you're still going overboard of what you actually can sustain to do. So you'll have everything within this line. And really the definition of what I look at is strategy is like when you define that list of things that you could do that actually makes sense and is plausible and is not completely left field. Now we got something that's something like this, right? So all that red are the things that we could do. This is the amount of capacity and space that we have to be able to do things. So when I look at strategy, it's about selecting all of the could do things that are in here that fill in our limited capacity that we have, that every single one of us have a limited amount of capacity. Some of us, depending on, again, some of the different pieces that come into capacity, may have more, may have less. So it's about figuring out from all these things, what are the things that are going to most likely get us closer to our actual goals. As you can see in this analogy over here, is that the things that we could do is much less than the things that we want to do. So the actual challenging thing is not picking what to do, it's actually picking what not to do based on all the things that we could be doing. It's really trying to narrow down this very select window that we actually have space to be able to achieve and making sure that we're picking the right amount of things that we can actually fit within this limited space. And the question is, how do you actually pick what to put into this space? So again, that's going to come into what your actual goals are, right? So goal setting, this is where this comes into play, right? Where I think there's a lot of different ways people set goals. I try to keep my goals really simplistic. When I'm setting a goal, I always try to make it quantifiable. I always try to figure out what is a number that I can backtrack from so that I can actually measure progress towards that goal rather than something that's more amorphous. For example, let's say you're running an e-commerce brand you want to have the best product in the world, right? Maybe there's some metrics that you can put in that, but that's going to be very hard to actually define. Whereas what I like to do is more so go based off of, because again, I run e-commerce based brands. I will typically like to look at revenue targets or profit targets or take home pay types of targets. And I think all of those are the big dominoes that if you hit those revenue targets, then a lot of those other goals that kind of come beneath it will fall by default if you do those. Now, obviously there's a lot of cases where that won't be the case, right? But if you're doing things strategically in the right way, then I like to find those big overarching goals that if we achieve that, then a lot of those other goals will likely happen as well. So to recap on these main things, and then we'll talk about if you want to actually see if you can expand your capacity, I'll get into that in just a second. But to recap, it all stems from what are your goals for the year? Now, based on those goals, there's going to be endless things that you could do. It's about, first off, narrowing down what are those things that you could do, and you're going to get to something like this, right? So you're going to have a lot that will eventually be in that red zone versus the actual capacity of time that you have. Now, in order to understand the amount of capacity of time that you actually have, that comes down to a lot of things I talk about in some of my other videos, where I think it's about defining what are all the tasks that you're spending time on, even trying to identify how much time each of those tasks take you, and then trying to identify what's the impact in the business and energy for you at a high level of what those are, ranking what those things are. And then you can really determine, okay, just for myself, this is the amount of capacity I have. These are what I deem to be the most important and highest leverage things. That's something that you can look at that all kind of circle back into the overarching goal, right? That's how you can define it for yourself, but then you can also really try to do this based on different employees that you have. How much capacity do they have? So like, for example, on the creatives team, it's like, how many creative briefs can my creative strategist do for me? How many videos can my video editors on an average basis edit for me? And it's like understanding that's like the actual like capacity that we have. And you can try to define this in all areas of the business. Like how many landing pages can my web developer make for me? How many new CRO split test ideas can my strategist do? And the more that you can quantify it, also actual output per team member, the more conclusive you're actually going to get into like how much your team and yourself can actually produce on a week to week, month to month, and year to year basis, given the current standings of where you guys are at. Understanding of, all right, this is how much capacity me and my current team actually has right now. And then these are all the things that I've narrowed down that I can do. And then strategy comes down to looking at all the things that we could be doing, all the different initiatives, and really trying to define what are the things that are going to get you closest to actually achieving the goal that you have set. for that business or in general. And obviously this goes outside of business too. I'm talking more in the context of business here, but this applies for life, right? If you have goals in general, there's always going to be a lot of things that you could do with the limited amount of time and resource that you have to do it. So it's really about figuring out a way to map that out, whether it's a piece of paper, whether it's on a document, whether it's on a mirror board, of understanding all the different things that you could be doing, trying to associate the amount of time that those different things do, trying to understand what your capacity is from a team perspective and yourself. That comes down to this limited window of time over here. And then really trying to determine, okay, what are the things that I have to cancel out? Because as you can see, this is 6x more than what you actually have capacity to do, give or take, right? So it's like, you have to cancel out 5 things out of the 6 things that you could be doing, right? And only getting down to 1 per 6, just a random example. So that's really like more or less legitimately how it comes down to. It's like you have to cancel way more things than what you can actually do. And that's how you really define strategy. It's about taking out all the things that you're not going to do, limiting the things that you will do, with the objective of getting closer to the goal that you have set by picking those things that you could be doing given your limited amount of time. So the last thing I want to touch on this is like capacity. How do you create more capacity, right? And like for us right now, right, we're going back, where I said in the beginning, where we're going full circle, we're going back into partnering with different businesses now. We're going back into working with people on a consulting basis. We're going back and have our own internal brands that we're running. So how are we doing all this? We've managed to create more capacity within our business over the last few years. And that's why we're going back into doing this in a much more sustainable route. All through this learning process where you need to have the structure, team capacity, and all these pieces in place. So let's talk about the ways that you can actually expand capacity if that is something that you want to do and if you want to take on more. So the first thing is team, right? That's the most obvious one, where if you can hire more people, for example, going back to the creatives example, because I think that's a really easy way to understand this. It's like, I know that my creative strategist can make me 30 briefs a week, and I know that each editor can make me 15 creatives a week, right? So that means if I want to create 30 ads, I need 1 strategist and 2 editors to make those 30 ads. So if my goal is to now expand to 300 ads on a weekly basis, let's just say I want to get some extreme scale, then what that will tell me is that I need to have 10 creative strategists and 20 video editors, right? That's the simple math on it. And that's how I can really understand, okay, if I want to get to this capacity, this is the amount of people that I need. Now, in order to do that, it's not just about people. You obviously need systems, you need pieces in place that I'm all putting really into this team number over here, right? So it's having a team that has the proper systems to work on that you actually can scale. So like the systems is the foundation so that you can scale up team with the systems. So I probably should have put that at its own point, but that's the first way that you can expand capacity. The second way you can expand capacity is through AI. And this is going to become increasingly more of an efficient way to increase capacity the more that we go. So it's figuring out whatever processes from the things that you're currently doing. So when you map out the things that you're doing, the things that your team need to do, understanding all of those different things, it's understanding what parts of that right now can be either heavily optimized using AI, so it can double output, triple output, maybe sometimes even 10x output, or completely automate different functions of your business. And the more that you start to do this, the more obviously capacity you're going to have, because the cool thing about AI, unlike team members, is that this is endless, right? If you figure out something that's fully automated with AI, then it's really just a matter of paying pennies on the dollar in terms of your fees for those AI costs to rapidly expand endlessly on those functions that you get through AI. So there's obviously different areas of the business where you can look at this, but this is a place where I'm putting a lot more focus, because that I know will create more capacity for us. The more that I start to understand that, and the more that we'll be able to actually take on from all these different initiatives that we have. The next one is capital. So capital, this can come in a lot of ways, right? So one, it helps us invest into AI. It helps us invest into acquiring more team members. So capital as a whole, cash flow, those are things that will help you create more capacity. It also can allow you to invest or acquire different parts of businesses over the long run, right? So this is something, again, it can help create more capacity. So these are similar, right, to Naval Rav leverage frameworks, right? So it's through a lot of these different things. I guess he talks about software, capital, team. But one thing I don't think he talks about, I think, is also just time horizon in which you plan, right? So if I were to plan something over 10 years versus a year, then obviously my capacity is going to be much bigger. So in theory, what's cool about this, and this is a good analogy to think about, is like all the things that I have here, I might be planning to do this all over the course of a year. But reality is, if I gave myself even 3 years, I might be able to do this much of it with the same amount of capacity that I currently have if I'm just willing to expand the time horizon to actually get all of those things done. So time horizon, and this is something Alex Hormozi talks a lot about, but I think this is a good way to like visually understand how that actually comes into fruition, is a way that you can actually achieve way more from the things that you initially set is if you give yourself a longer time to actually achieve those things. So all in all, if you want to be able to create more of this capacity, which is something that in terms of strategy is a big thing, right? Because the limited capacity is something we're all going to have. So we're always going to have less capacity than the things that we could do, but we also want to maximize the amount of capacity we actually can have in order to be able to achieve more, right? So these are really the only ways that I've come across that you can do that. AI and software, we can put that into one group, right? Ultimately, the real definition of strategy are doing the things that are going to get you closer to the goals that you have set. The things that you could do to get you closer are going to always be more things that you could do than you actually have the capacity to do. The capacity that you have to do comes down to the time that you have yourself as a founder, the time that your team has as a team as a whole, the capital that you have, and ultimately the time horizon which you're willing to do it, right? So that's how you really can start to understand capacity. Again, there's ways that you can reverse engineer. Watch some other videos on my channel. That'll help you understand it from a higher level. But pretty much there's things that you can try to do to reverse engineer the actual capacity of time that you have and your team has. And then these are all the things that you could be doing. So the thing and the mistake that a lot of people make is that they try to fit way more of what they think they can do in the limited amount of time. So the first thing is you have to have a clear understanding that there is this discrepancy between things that you want to do and the time that you actually have to do it. And strategy ultimately comes down to picking from all the things that you could be doing, which are all the things in this red, to prioritizing those in the things that you could do that you think from those limited things that you pick from all the things that you could do are going to be the things that are going to give you the best chance to actually achieving your goals. Now, if you want to create more capacity, right, if we want to grow this capacity and give ourselves a little bit more, and even let's call it on a year basis, then we have to understand that these are going to be the only ways that we can actually do that, right? Because all of us, assuming that you're working full time and working your ass off, you have 24 hours in a day and you can be more efficient with your time. Again, I have a video that literally will break that down for you in terms of how you can start to create more efficiency, but you're going to be capped at some point or another, right? So the only way that you can create more of this from the functions that you're trying to do within a business is having the right team members and the right systems to do that, having AI and automations in place as much as possible, having capital and resources to fund those two things, or go out and do some more creative ways of expanding by maybe acquiring that software that you need or acquiring an agency, for example, that has those team members that you need. Obviously, you have to be at a bigger business level for that part to make sense. Or lastly, just giving yourself a little bit more time to achieve it rather than trying to cram it as quickly as possible, giving yourself a little bit more time to actually achieve those goals. So all in all, this is how I would define strategy. Hopefully this gives you guys some context. If you guys actually want to work with me directly, one-on-one, where we can work together to actually look at your current scenario, create the proper strategy, and help you hopefully scale to new heights and new levels in 2026, you guys can check the link down below to apply for my one-on-one consulting group, where you're going to work with me, my co-founders, our actual team, to hopefully help get you to 8 figures and beyond per year. Thanks for watching.